Hi, Red. Sure, it will help you increase your sales and income. Red made this speech in Motley. Hi, salesman. This is Jack Lacey. I am very happy I can bring you this record by Red Motley. I feel very sure it will help you increase your sales and income. Red made this speech in Boston after sitting up all night in a day coach from... Hi, salesman. This is Jack Lacey. I am very happy I can bring you this record by Red Motley. I feel very sure it will help you increase your sales and income. Red made this speech in Boston after sitting up all night in a day coach from Baltimore. His plane from California was grounded there, and there was no other way he could get to the meeting in Boston to make the speech to a group of salesmen that were expecting him. This is just one more evidence of Red's great devotion to the salesman of America. Red is a great salesman. He has sold many things very successfully. But he culminated his achievements when he took over Parade magazine, when it was a very small publication with 1,800,000 circulation and doing an advertising volume of less than 2 million a year. Today, Parade is an acknowledged leader among all the great magazines of this country. It has a circulation of more than 11 million and advertising sales of more than 25 million a year. You have to be a great salesman to do a job like that in a tough, competitive field like advertising. Red has given more to us salesmen than any other man I know. And this speech is his masterpiece. Here he is, Red Motley.
Can we have the house lights on? I long ago learned if you can't see them, you can't sell them. I did arrive here from Baltimore by a day coach, Pennsylvania, New Haven. I'd forgotten how horrible those ham sandwiches and that cold coffee that guy sold off a bucket on his arm was till last night. But nobody could assure me the Boston airport was going to be open this morning. And although I've been doing this for many, many years, more than 30, I've never missed a meeting. And I've never missed a meeting because there's always a way you can get there if you want to be there. To set the stage for what I want to talk to you about, I'd like to tell you a cute little story about the 12-year-old Catholic boy in an argument with a little Jewish boy of the same age, and it was a typical small boy argument. My father can lick your father, my father's richer than your father, our house is bigger than your house, and finally the little Catholic boy said, well, our priest is smarter than your rabbi. And the little Jewish kid said, why not? You tell him everything. I'm not going to tell you everything here today in the next 30 minutes, but I hope to be able to tell you something that'll be useful to you and to your sales organizations in the coming year and perhaps beyond. There is no doubt about the fact that the United States of America is great. Great in every area. Military power, political, economic power. The thing that's lost sight of in generalities is a failure to understand why we are great. I want to talk about a fundamental that, in my opinion, has made this country great. We hear a lot of talk today about the need for more and better education, and I think most of us agree with that. But some of us fail to understand that if we would have more and better education, The thing we need more than anything else are more dedicated, better trained, professional educators. Everybody is interested in more and better health and medical care. But in the arguments that rage back and forth on this question, the fundamentally important thing is frequently lost sight of, that if we're going to have more and better health and medical care, we're only going to have it as we increase the number of well-trained, dedicated, professional doctors. No one can give us better health and better medical care except the professional. We're concerned about the spiritual and moral character of our people, particularly teenagers. We lose sight of the fact that if we want a higher, better moral tone, it can only come through more dedicated and better trained professional leadership in the field of the moral and the spiritual area, which means more and better trained and better dedicated preachers, priests, and rabbis. And so it is in the field of commerce. We are dedicated to growth, forward movement, the reduction of unemployment, the increase of employment, the expansion of job opportunities, the expansion of our gross national product and our personal income. And yet too many of us fail to realize that this cannot come through any other means than by the increase in the number of well-trained, dedicated, professional salesmen. It can come in no other way. This is why it is important, even though in our profession, selling, we're permitted to enter this profession without a degree from an institution of higher learning, which is required of a doctor or a lawyer or an educator or a preacher. This is why we must dedicate ourselves to the proposition that further growth in the economic area can come only as we increase the power of professional salesmen, want creators, men who understand that they are not merely engaged in filling the needs of this very prosperous country, but are engaged in creating wants. And this is a process which is fundamental to all human progress. This is the way we've made progress in education, because more of our people, regardless of social or economic status, have wanted a higher education, and they got it. And so it is in medicine, religion, or any of the other professions. I want to talk about a personal experience that I encountered 25 years ago, and which has stood me in good stead ever since. It's really a short course in how to be, how to become, how to remain a real professional in the field of selling, want creating. It's a simple course, 15 words. Know your product, see a lot of people, ask all to buy, use common sense. Know your product. This is fundamental. It's a platitude. But if you carry it to the point where it becomes professional, you realize that knowing your product and what it's made of isn't enough. Because any want creator, any professional has got to understand and know his product in terms of user, customer benefits. What is your product or service going to do for the group or the people or the person or the company that you're offering it to? I'm in the publishing business. Our people who sell Parade have to know that we use a gravure process. They have to know that that means we print from an etched rather than a raised surface. All of this is important and interesting, but it doesn't answer it in terms of the customer's benefit. There's a reason why we use gravure, and that reason is greater customer satisfaction. And until our salesmen are smart enough to interpret this printing process of ours in terms of the customer benefit, he's not really a pro. The reason we use the gravure process is because we can not only run at high speeds, but by using an etched rather than a raised surface, we can put more ink on the paper, and we can achieve a better result, more brilliant colors, more powerful impact for the advertising, which is what the customer, the advertiser, is interested in. We have 11 million circulation, but that isn't really what the customer wants to know. This is impressive. But what he wants to know is, what will Parade do for me in Akron or Boston or St. Louis? And when our salesmen are prepared and understand the importance of that, then we begin to sell. Not 11 million circulation, but what our product will do for the fellow that wants to sell more goods in Boston. Because we sell the Boston Globe. We distribute through newspapers. And our people have to understand that although we've got 11 million circulation all over the United States, what the customer wants to know is how much have we got in Boston, and where does it go, and how well does it saturate the readers of this area that are close to the retail outlets. And it's for the benefit of the retail outlets that the national advertiser is spending that national advertising dollar. Reminds me of the old story of the fellow that went out to sell a heating plant to the little old lady. And he told her all about the tensile strength of the boiler and the steam capacity and the pressure and the safety valves and everything else. And when he got all through, the little old lady asked him the $64,000 question. Will it keep me warm in the wintertime? And he'd forgotten that. That's the reason she bought it. Know your product in terms of customer benefits and sell those benefits. And don't overpower the prospect with how good you are, how great your product is. See a lot of people. This means, of course, working a full day, 6 days a week or whatever the program is. It means working from 9 to 5. It means organizing your territories and being on the job so you don't waste a lot of time meeting yourself coming back. But it means a great deal more than that, I found out. Because you see a lot of people other than those that you get the body in front of, because there isn't enough time in the day or a week or a month or a year to see everybody as frequently as you'd like to see them. Let me illustrate what I mean. Years ago, when I was looking for the best retail shoe salesman in America, I'm not sure I found him, but I found the greatest one I could find anywhere. And he sold shoes in Boston. He didn't have the best location. He didn't have the best line of shoes. He didn't have the most national advertising. Why was he the best salesman? Because he saw a lot of people. How'd he do it? Well, his system was this. When he wasn't fitting people's shoes, he got the books, dug up those that hadn't been in and used their charge account for 6 months or more. And in those days, you could buy penny postal cards stamped from the post office for $0.01 apiece. And he sat down and wrote out to these people that hadn't been in the store in 6 months or more a little card reminding them of where they were, who he was, what they sold, and inviting him to come in. And he was selling more shoes than any other shoe salesman I could find in the United States of America. And he was selling them because he was seeing more people, figuratively speaking. I got transferred to the city of Detroit in 1931. And at a convention that year, I met a man from Pittsburgh, advertising director of a great corporation. We got acquainted. He wasn't in my territory, but he was in my business. And over the next 10 years, I kept in touch with him. I saw him frequently because in reading newspapers and the trade press, I'd frequently run across a reference to his company, a financial statement. They'd opened a new warehouse. He'd made a speech. And I tore it out, clipped it, scribbled a little note, and sent it to him. 10 years later, I'm back in New York at the home office. And the salesman from Pittsburgh came in and said, "We're in trouble. Do you know anybody at this company?" And I said, "Why, sure, I know the advertising director very well." And over a period of 10 years, although I'd never seen him except that once, we'd become frank and read to each other. I picked up the phone, called him up, said I wanted to see him at a time mutually convenient to him. He said, "We always have a board of directors meeting at the plant every Friday morning, then we lunch together. Why don't you come down next Friday and have lunch with the board of directors?" I wouldn't have known the man if he'd have walked in the room. The salesman never believed that I'd only actually literally seen that man once in my life. I had no problem getting to him. I'd been calling on him for 10 years. I'd established myself as a friend because I was interested in him, and I'd exhibited that interest. It didn't only coincide with my attempt to sell him something. See a lot of people. When I went to Detroit, I was assigned a big automobile company, and we weren't doing any business with them. And for 2.5 years, I called on some 30 people in the various divisions of that great automobile company and 3 different agencies. And I never got off the ground. I wasn't very smart in those days. Now, I wouldn't have waited 2.5 years to find out what was wrong. But at the end of 2.5 years, I went to see a friend of mine. I'd made some friends, although I'd gotten no business. And I said, "What have I got to do to get some business from this corporation?" And he laughed and he said, "Well, the president of this corporation really built it. He still runs it. And until he indicates that he likes your publication, you're never going to get any business." I was aware of the fact that this great multi-million-dollar tycoon was not going to hold still for a little peddler by the name of Motley for one of those flip-flop charts 45-minute pitch. But I'd been told that I couldn't get the business if I didn't get him to give me a favorable nod. And so I did what every professional salesman ought to do all the time. I did a little research. Where was he born? What jobs did he held? When did he get married? How many children he had? Who his friends were? What his avocation was? And for months and months, nothing happened. And then I got a break. This is the importance of research, personal research. This is the importance of being prepared. Every salesman gets breaks all the time and fails to recognize them, fails to capitalize on them because he isn't prepared. In my publication appeared an article about Florenz Ziegfeld, creator of the Ziegfeld Follies. Wouldn't have meant anything to me normally, except as a result of this research, I knew that this multi-million-dollar tycoon was a close personal friend of Florenz Ziegfeld. And so I tore that article out, pasted it in a little imitation leatherette folder, went for $1.50 to have his name stamped in imitation gold leaf. And then I violated a company rule. We had a rule that you couldn't write to any customer or prospect except on a company letterhead. And I knew that I'd never get by the first secretary, let alone the third. So I went out and at my own expense had some of that small, heavy, expensive stationery. I didn't have it printed. I went for a die. And it said Arthur Harrison Motley. That's my full moniker. General Motors Building, Detroit. No room number, no address. Big stuff. This guy's a multi-million-dollar tycoon. And I sent it over by boy. 10 days later, I got a letter back from him. He didn't say he'd read my magazine, but he said he'd read that article. And then he went on to say that he thought it was a wonderful thing that a big, great magazine like mine was writing articles about wonderful people like his friend Florenz Ziegfeld. And I slipped that letter in a cellophane envelope and ran it around to those 30-odd people in the agencies and the various divisions. But that letter triggered a lot of business. And it triggered it because I saw, in quotes, the fellow that I had to see. See a lot of people. Every newspaper, every trade paper represents a wonderful opportunity for salesmen to make calls on people at a time when they're not there physically and on a basis that's ideal, because they're not poking him in the chest trying to sell him something. They're talking about him, his company, his family, his interest. It works. And people say, because they haven't really thought it through, why, this is kind of silly. The guy knows he made that speech. He knows they had a good financial statement. He knew they built that big plant. He knew he got elected president of Rotary. He knew his wife gave a party. He knew his daughter got married. His wife probably called up the society editor and gave her the information. All true. But that's not what he's interested in. He wants to know, did anybody else see it? That's why he put it in the paper. And when I tear it out and send it to him, he knows I saw it. One word of caution. Only good news. If his company didn't do well, skip it. Ask all to buy. This is the close. I learned this way back in the winter of 27, 28 when I was selling cough syrup off the rear end of a truck to drugstores. But I didn't understand it until I read a book. And in this book they had various ways of closing sales. And as I read this book, I suddenly came to one and I said, that's the way you do it, Motley. People say, well, why is that important? You obviously knew how to do it. You'd become a successful salesman, an office manager, Western manager of a big corporation. What difference did it make whether you knew how you did it, as long as you could do it? It makes this difference. Now that I know how I do it, I never go to make a call without being prepared to close. My close, he described very aptly as the narrative close. It's a wonderful close. And quite simply, it's this. You tell him what your product or your service has done successfully for somebody exactly like him. It's a great climate creator. Most salesmen walk into most places of business with the worst sales opening in the world. How's business, Joe? Even if his business is good, what does he do? He lies. He knows you want to sell him something, and even if he's going to buy from you, he isn't going to buy as much as you think he ought to have. So what does he do? He lies. If it's wonderful, it's just good. If it's good, it's only fair. If it's fair, it's poor. If it's poor, it's lousy. And you've started behind the 8 ball. Ever since that time I've found out, and we teach our salesmen to walk in with good news, a good climate creator, a success story. We weren't getting any shoe business. And then we, by some sleight of hand ledger domain, a salesman out in the West made a sale on a little company that makes hush puppies. And it was very successful. And they grew and they had to build new factories. And all the other shoe salesmen then got that story down pat. What happened? How much did they spend? Where did they spend it? What were the actual sales figures, profit figures, expansion figures? And then we took that to U.S. Shoe in Cincinnati, the International Shoe in St. Louis, and we got that business. And last September when I was in St. Louis, we had a meeting with the Brown Shoe Company. And we told them what we'd done for Hush Puppies, told them what we'd done for U.S. Shoe, what we'd done for International Shoe. I haven't got any crystal ball, but I'll bet we get the Brown Shoe business. Because we weren't around talking about the weather. We weren't around talking about 11 million circulation. We weren't around talking about low rates, wonderful color reproduction. We were talking about the thing he was most interested in. How could he sell more shoes? And how could he sell more through those dealers and they make more money? And if Hush Puppies and U.S. and International did it, why can't Brown? I stumbled onto this by accident. I had 7 men in the field getting distribution for a new cough syrup, Smith Brothers. We weren't doing very well. Why weren't we doing very well? Obviously, every druggist had cough syrup running out of his ears. He had Rem, Ayers Cherry Pectoral, Pertussin, Father John's, you name it, he had it. And then he had his own that he jungled up in the prescription department, of which he made 1,000% profit. He didn't want another cough syrup. And then one day, on my own time, I did a little of this priceless thing I mentioned a moment ago, a little research. I took my truck, a 3/4-ton Wolverine Rio, and went back to Albany, where we'd worked a month before. And I checked to see what had happened to the stores that we'd got in. Not all of them were successful, because some of them took the window display out 2 days after we left, because some smart salesman came along and sold his window display in, and ours went out. Those I didn't bother with. Remember, I said good news. But I found a lot of those stores that had left the window display in, that had left the counter card up, that had left our product on the shelves, and they had reordered 6, 8, 10, 12 times that month from the wholesale drug house. I got the specific figures. In addition to that, I got the actual label from that drugstore to paste in my book, so that when I showed it to a fella in Erie, he believed that I'd been and called on the ABC Drug Company on the corner of 4th and Main in Albany. I taught this to this group of salesmen. We paid them $25 and $30 a week. And if they stayed in a hotel room that cost over $1.50 a night, they got fired. The Smiths were frugal as well as brothers. Within 10 days, every guy on that staff doubled his sales. Doubled them. Because what was he doing? He was using the narrative clothes, and he was walking in with good news. And good news that wasn't a general claim. It was based on the specific actual performance of a person in the same line of business who did what we were asking this fellow to do and made money on it. Interpreting the product in terms of the customer's interest and use. Use common sense. This is the toughest of all, because while we all have common sense, a lot of us forget to use it. Everything we do is selling. This isn't something you put on in the morning and take off at night. It isn't something you put on when you get the body in front of a prospect and take off when you leave. No, if you're a real professional, like a good professional doctor, whose phone may ring in the middle of the night, and one of his patients is sick, and he goes and takes care of it. Everything is selling. Let me give you a few illustrations. Appearance sells. Everybody knows this. Everybody's heard 1,000,000 times. You gotta be neat, you gotta be clean, shaven, haircut, shoes shined, pants pressed, and all the rest of it. But this is only half of it. You're a professional. You're like a doctor. You're prescribing something for your patient, in this case your customer or your prospect. And you want him to do what you're suggesting because it'll benefit him. And this is what a doctor does, isn't it? But the success or failure of this consultation, this confrontation of the doctor, the salesman, the patient, the customer, depends on how he feels toward you. And you ought to look like you knew what you were talking about. You don't have to dress like an undertaker, but I'm always shocked when I see salesmen walking around with sports shirts on, loud colored jackets, unmatching slacks, suede shoes, because they don't look like they knew anything about business. I don't shop very often with my wife, but when I do, I notice that she always avoids the chic, upswept hairdo, the plunging necklines, the high heels. She don't go to those sales girls. And when I asked her why, she said, well, I want to do business with somebody that looks like they really knew whether this was color fast, whether you could put it through the washing machine, whether you could iron it with a hot iron. Now let's take this thing a step further. How do you look to the fella on the other side, the buyer? I remember a fellow sitting in front of me trying to sell me something, and all the time he sat there with the right index finger of his hand, he kept poking in his right ear. Within 5 minutes, I'm not paying any attention to him. I'm just marveling at the durability of the human ear that could take 45 years of digging. I even wondered what had happened if he ever broke through and got inside. I brought back a writer from the North African campaign during the war. Magnificent, big, tall, fine-looking young fella, Gordon Gaskell. We put him on a series of promotion lunches, coast to coast. I caught the show in the Gold Room at the Drake Hotel. All the time he talked, he rubbed his nose, he rubbed his nose, he rubbed his nose until my nose began to itch just watching him rub his. When we got upstairs, I said, Gordon, wonderful material, fine. What's wrong with your nose? Nothing, says he. He denied that he rubbed his nose. But the next day in Cleveland at the Statler Hotel, I noticed every time his hand had started to go up, he stopped. He didn't know he was doing it. I remember the first time I ever heard a recording of a sales pitch of mine. All the way through it was I didn't have a cold, I didn't have laryngitis, I was just nervous. I'm always nervous when I sell. Took me a long time to break myself of that habit. But it's an annoying habit. People don't like it. As head of the Detroit office, it was my job to put on the big automobile survey every year. I rehearsed it, I was letter perfect, I didn't have to look at the stuff on those charts, I knew what was on them. And after we'd done it one time, the first time out, I turned to one of the salesmen present, I said, how'd it go? He said, you sounded like a broken record. Well, this was kind of a shock. I said, what do you mean? Well, he said, every time you turned the page, you said, as you would expect to find, as you would expect to find, as you would expect to find, as you would expect to find. He was right. I didn't know I was doing it. Appearance is not merely being neat and clean, tidy. Oh, no. It's the composite impression that you personally, individually, by your actions, facial expressions, tone of voice. How does it sound? How do you look? Important. Almost everybody that sells knows, if he's at all smart, that somebody in addition to the buyer is helpful in making the sale. Common sense would dictate that we'd pay some attention to those people. The receptionist, sure, she may not be paid very much money. She may not be very bright. She's put there to receive us, the salesman. But I've seen a lot of these so-called professionals walk up and not even take the hat off their head when they talk to her. Some of them don't even take the cigarette out of their mouth. Makes a lot of difference whether she picks up the phone and says, Mr. Motley's here for his appointment, or whether she says, there's a Mr. Motley here who says he has an appointment with you. I had an Irish girl by the name of Reeves that worked for me for 18 years. Nobody got in to see me that she didn't like. I heard a lot of complaints about that, and I never did a thing about it, and why should I? I figure that anybody that's dumb enough to antagonize my assistant is too dumb for me to waste any time talking to. Once a year, we have a promotion that isn't designed for any other reason except to cultivate for our salesmen the goodwill of receptionists and secretaries and assistants. And the last one we got out was a little bit of an imitation gold book with a pad in it and a pencil run through the loop that she could keep in her pocketbook to keep notes on. And I walked into the office of BBD&O in the Penobscot building with Frank Norton, one of our salesmen in Detroit, and I was introduced. And she looked at me with a smile and said, Mr. Norton is one of our favorite people. Did you see what he gave me? And she pulled this thing out of her pocketbook. We paid 19 cents a piece for them, grosses of them. She loved it. And we got in to see the head of the agency immediately. Common sense. Let me give you one more and then I'm through. I said something about professionals, and I said something about doctors. And I was quite serious about it because to me, our greatest weakness, the weakness of any profession, is our failure to understand the importance of research and review. An obstetrician is a doctor whose patients, customers, are all in the same boat. They're pregnant, and they want him to deliver their baby. But he doesn't assume that because they've all got the same needs, the same wants and whatnot, that they're all alike. Oh, no. He takes a little time to find out the difference between the fat ones and the thin ones, the tall ones, the short ones, the nervous ones, the placid ones. In order to do what? Why, to do a more professional job, to suit his handling of that particular problem, which may seemingly be identical with every other problem, but he knows it isn't. And this last illustration will illustrate what I mean. In the city of South Bend, 1938, I'm Western manager. In the presence of the same salesman, on the same prospect, I struck out swinging. Never got off the ground. I'm so chagrined that I'm not going to ride back to Chicago with the salesman in his car. I rode back on the old interurban that used to run. But on the way back, I'm doing what every professional does. I'm going over that interview. What I said, what he said, what I did, what he did. What am I looking for? I'm looking for something that went wrong, something that I didn't do or did that was wrong. And I'm not getting very far. And then all of a sudden, because I was thinking about this in the two previous interviews, it suddenly dawned on me that this was a little guy. With his Adlers on, he wouldn't have gone 5 feet. And then I remembered the advertising manager of a big automobile company in Detroit. And he was a little guy, and I had trouble with him. And then I remember the vice president in charge of sales of one of the greatest automobile companies in the world. And he was a little guy, and I'd had trouble with him. And so when I got to 333 North Michigan, I looked in the yellow pages of the phone book. And I dug up a sales institute, made a date at 10 o'clock to see the fellow that ran it. And I walked in and said, look, I don't want to take the course, but I'll pay you $25 cash if you'll tell me how to sell these little guys that are shorties. I can hear that fellow laugh yet. I'm not going to bore you with everything he told me, but he said, I'll tell you one thing that's wrong right off the bat. He said, you come in all busting with vigor, vitality, you're wired for sound, you walk over and vigorously shake his hand, doesn't get out of his chair, does he? Well, I said, no, usually he doesn't. He said, why should he? He doesn't stand any taller than he sits, and there you are towering over him. He said, I'll bet you're the kind of a guy that just loves to run his arm around the little guy's neck and rub his nose in your navel, and you think he likes it. He was right. I'm very self-conscious now about this. Even after 25 years, I've seen little guys cringe when some big guy slapped him on the back. I know what motivates the big guy in loving, tender kindness to run his arm around the little guy's shoulder, but all he does is to accentuate the fact that he's got more bone and muscle and sinew than this little guy. Not necessarily that he's got more between the ears. Why do it? Not if I'm right, that selling is a profession in the same sense of the word that education, religion, medicine, our law, our professions. This is a profession. Not selling, want creating. A fundamental principle that has lifted this country into its present preeminent position. We could not have attained our military posture greater than anything else in the world if we had not made the American people wanted enough to be willing to pay the taxes to finance the $50 or $55 billion budget. And so it is with those of us engaged in commerce. It's our problem not to fill needs, but to make our customers want our products and services in ever-increasing volume in order that we may continue to be the envy of the rest of the world, not merely militarily, politically, or socially, but economically as well. Thank you very much for listening.